Okay, this is video number 2 on your navigation exercise for AER 110 online. Again, the first video I showed you how to plot the headings and the courses on the Charlotte sectional. So now that you've done that and you've written down your headings and your distances from each of your checkpoints, now we're going to record that information on your navigation log. The assignment has an Excel spreadsheet with a Navlog template that you can use, and that's on Moodle, and I also posted it on the assignment as well. On the Navlog, under Checkpoints column, you want to record your departure airport in the first box. Then, TOC or top of climb. When you think about your flight profile, you're going to take off out of Moore County and you're going to climb to your altitude. The altitude that we selected was 2,500 feet based on the minimum obstacles that we found on your Charlotte sectional. The next box, of course, you're going to put SDZ VOR as your next checkpoint after your top of climb. Once we get to the VOR, then we'll make a left-hand turn. We found out it was 195 down towards Florence. We're also going to put our VFR checkpoints that we selected on the Charlotte sectional. We said, all right, we're going to make our turn at the VOR. We're going to look for the Richmond Raceway. We're going to look for Bennettsville and the Bennettsville Airport. And then we're going to look for our descent point when we hit I-20, just 5 miles north of Florence. Then we're going to descend down from our 2,500 feet down to about 1,100 feet because the Florence elevation is 147 feet, and 1,000 feet above that will give us our pattern altitude. You want to record our VOR stations along the way that we can use so that you'll have that for reference. Since you plotted the headings for each of your legs, you want to record this data in that route column of your Navlog, and the course from SOP and to your top of climb should be the same as from top of climb to the VOR, since they are on the same course line. These true headings will then be converted to compass headings later. So we have already determined that our cruising altitude is going to be 2,500 feet, and we talked about our obstacle clearance and determining 2,500, and so these next paragraphs are for determining your altitude. The next thing you want to do is record in your Navlog your routes and your altitudes. Okay, and so we know from KSOP, and this is intuitive as you go, you're going to go from KSOP to your top of climb at a heading of 265. Then you go top of climb to the VOR heading 265. Then you're going to make your turn. You're going to make your VOR towards Florence at 195, and then your course all the way down there was 195. Okay, you're going to climb out from, I say, 0 to 2,500 feet for your first leg to your top of climb. I mean, if you put, it would be okay if you put the 495 feet here for the SOP altitude. I just put 2,500. Either way is fine. And you can go ahead and know that you're going to be cruising at 2,500 feet right here until you descend down to your pattern altitude at 1147. So to do this next exercise, now you already had this off the Charlotte sectional, but to do the next exercise, you're going to need both sides of your E6B. You're going to need the wind side here to do your wind corrections for heading and airspeed, which will give you your ground speed. And you're also going to need the calculation side to do your distance, time, and speed calculations. You'll need to do your gallons per hour fuel calculations, and you'll need to use this window here to take your pressure, altitude, and your temperature, and to determine your true airspeed and your density altitude, so that you can actually get what your true airspeed is for your planning. So you'll definitely need the E6B for that. Okay. Now, in our problem here, Okay. The next thing you're going to need is, and you would be getting your weather briefing for this, you're going to need to know the wind direction, velocity, temperature, and pressure altitude at your cruising altitude. And you would do this, you call 1-800-WEATHER-BRIEF and get a weather briefing from flight service. For this particular problem, we're going to say that the wind direction is 190 and the velocity is at 10 knots. Temperature at your altitude, 2500, is 1300 Celsius. And then the PA is 2200 feet. Now, a couple ways to find your pressure altitude. If you're at altitude, just turn your Colesman window on your altimeter to 2992. That'll give you the PA. But you can also calculate it if you have a different altimeter setting. And we'll cover that in another lesson. This wind will be good for the entire trip for this problem. So in the wind column, you're going to want to put that in your nav log. And it should look something like this. 190 at 10, there's your 13, all the way down. So you can see right here on your nav log that we put our wind in. Now what do we have to do? Well, we have to next figure out from what our indicated airspeed is to our true airspeed. Now, to convert from calibrated or indicated airspeed, we're going to use those interchangeably today. Normal 172 at cruise is going to cruise at about 110 knots. So we're going to say that you're going to indicate 110 knots on your airspeed indicator. Okay. The one exception to that would be while you're climbing. We said we were climbing at about 75 knots. So we're just going to say your true airspeed, since you're changing altitudes, is 75 knots in your climb. Now you'll notice here my calibrated airspeed here is different than my true airspeed down here. Now how do I get that? And I'm going to show you on your E6B how we do that. Okay, so we said that our temperature, I'm going to turn this sideways so you can see it. There you go. We said our temperature is 13 degrees and our pressure altitude is 2200 feet. So right here you can see the temperature is on the positive side right here is about 13 degrees. There's 10 right there. And you need to put that opposite 2200 feet. Well, it's at about 25,000 now, so I'm going to twist this around till I get about 2200 feet. Each tick mark here is going to be 2,000 or 1,000 per tick mark. Right there is 5,000. You can see right there. So I'm going to go back over here and put my 13 degrees, which is pretty much right there, about on the second tick mark, right there. Okay? So my density altitude is right here, which is basically about 3,000 feet, a little bit higher than our regular altitude. But then I come up here and I say, all right, if we're cruising at 110 right here, okay, I'm cruising at 110, then we look on the outside and there's the 11, and we're 4 more ticks there, so that would be 110, 11, 12, 13, 14. That's how I come up with my 114 true airspeed. So on my log here, once I get to altitude here and level off, then my true airspeed at 2,500 feet is going to be 114 knots. Now, is that going to be my ground speed? No. The reason is I'm going to have wind blowing me. Now, how am I going to take care of that? Right here, I'm going to correct my heading for my wind, and over here where it says ground speed, I am going to correct my ground speed, and I'm going to do both of those on the E6B. Here's my E6B setup for my climb out. We knew we were going 265 degrees, and we know that we're climbing out at a true 75 knots. So with a wind of 190 at 10, here's the setup on your E6B. You put the 265 heading on your true heading up here. And then you want to correct with your wind arm. So you take your 10 knots here and you put it on the 75 knot line here. There's your curved line for 75 knots. There's 70, there's 80, so you're halfway in between. To read your heading and ground speed corrections, you're underneath 100 knots. Each tick mark here is 2 knots, or 2 degrees. And so I've got 1, 2, basically 4 tick marks, which is an 8-degree correction to the left. Okay, so I basically have to take away 8 degrees. Since I'm going this way, you can see I'm going from 260, 250, 240. So it's basically my heading correction is minus 8 degrees, or 8 degrees to the west. My ground speed is right here, is where the grommet is. Okay, so you can see here's 70, and the grommet's up at about 72 knots. So over the ground, the wind is blowing me across, so I'm doing 75 knots. I've got a crosswind, and my ground speed, it's slowing me down just by a couple knots because it's mostly a crosswind. But I've got a pretty big crosswind heading correction here. All right, I'm going to do the next one. I'll do the setup for once we get to altitude. And once we level off at altitude, again, we're still going 265 here. So I've got the 265 true heading, and my wind arm is still 190 at 10. But now my crosswind correction is not quite as much. It's only 5 degrees because we're up at altitude and we're going faster. I come back down here for my ground speed, and it is slowing me down a tiny bit. Let's see. I want to put the grommet there on 114. There we go, right? That 10 knot goes on 114. And it looks like my ground speed's about 104, between 104 and 102, right in there. Okay, so that's how you do your ground speed correction. And then you're going to record that in your nav log. So let's take a look at the nav log. There we go. So for my climb out, there was my minus 8 degrees. Okay, so I took my course route of 265 and took away 8 degrees because I got to correct to the left for my wind. Right here, this 8 degrees here is variation. You find that on your Charlotte sectional. It's a magenta line, and that's the variation between magnetic north and true north. In this case, it's plus 8 or 8 degrees west for our location. And so I'm going to add that 8 back in. And then the deviation has to do with the magnetic polarity of the aircraft, and each aircraft has its own deviation, and in this case we're using minus 2. Okay, so your compass heading that you're going to see here, corrected for wind, variation, and deviation, is 263. So you steer 263 on your magnetic compass. Once we got up to altitude, same thing. Our correction was left 5 degrees, took that away from the 265, there's 260, added back in my 8 degrees variation from the map, and then took away my 2. So once we get to altitude, I'm going to adjust my compass heading 3 degrees. Okay, and you do your wind corrections the exact same way all the way down. Once you turn south to 195, and then you just put your wind corrections in the exact same way. Now I'm going to stop this and move on to the video number 3 because I can only do 15 minutes. So we're going to have a third video to finish up the nav log.